All right, John McCarty here with Odyssey Test Prep. Today I want to talk about argumentation. All right, this is super important. This is the foundation of what the LSAT is testing on. So in an argument, there's two basic parts. There's one third one that's like a little tricky and maybe a fourth if you're being real nitpicky. But the two that I have in my head that I always rely on, you have premises, which are support or evidence, and then you have conclusions. And the conclusion is the thing that is being supported. It's the thing they're trying to drive towards. It's the point that they're trying to make overall. And on the LSAT, a valid argument or a valid conclusion is an argument such that the conclusion must be true if we accept the truth of all the premises. On the LSAT, we are not attacking the truth of the premises. We're really attacking, even if they're true, I still don't think you'll get to the conclusion. The conclusion doesn't have to follow because of this idea or this reason, or you missed this, or there's an assumption over here, right? So when you're looking at argumentation, it's very rare that they put together a good argument on the LSAT, which is maybe counterintuitive. But if you're going to strengthen an argument, it has to start as a bad argument. You can't strengthen a valid argument. Once it's valid, you can't be like more valid than valid. So if you're going to strengthen, if you're going to weaken, if you're going to find a required assumption, a necessary assumption, and a sufficient assumption, if you're going to find the flaw, parallel the flaw, all of these things require you starting with a flawed or invalid argument to begin with. So there's usually gaps between those premises and that conclusion. Now, as far as conclusions, there's the main conclusion. There's intermediate conclusions. So intermediate conclusions are they serve two functions. They're a conclusion because there's a premise that supports it, but they're also a premise because they then support the main conclusion. So they're kind of like this stop off in between the premises and the main conclusion. They have this structure of like, all right, we have this evidence supports this conclusion with this conclusion and our evidence, and now supports the main conclusion. So those are the basic components of an argument. Now, sometimes there's some background information, but functionally, it's not important to be like clocking that as background information. As long as you know where the conclusion is, that's your number one task. When anytime you find an argument, first and foremost, find the conclusion. If you're not doing that, you need to start building that habit. It's fundamental for you to really scale up where you want to go and to have your score increase to where your potential really is. I have no doubt you can increase your score without doing it. I've seen it done. I don't know that I've seen anybody really max out. I'm talking plus 20 points, plus 30 points, kind of max out without getting that fundamental aspect of finding the conclusions down. Super, super critical. I cannot stress that the most. So then you have premises. A lot of times, if it's an argument, I'll find the conclusion and assume everything else is a premise. And if some background information gets thrown in there, it's usually not, there's no consequence to it. You're not going to get dinged for it. You can just kind of assume everything else. Now, there's certain question types like role questions or main conclusion questions where you need to make a little adjustment. But for the most part, you're going to be pretty safe if you find the main conclusion and assume everything else is a premise. Even if there is an intermediate conclusion, that's still a premise for the conclusion like we talked about. There will be premises and there may be background information, but all of that functions basically to support the conclusion of the argument, which means it's a premise, right? So there's certain words that let you know that a premise is going to come and a conclusion is going to come. So we're going to create a few videos around that. Make sure you like and subscribe, hit the bell so you'll get notified when we post those videos.